It's a Star Wars show. Welcome to it. I'm your host, Jon Justice. I'm glad you're with another episode this week as we talk about that galaxy far, far away. If you want to email me at any point throughout the show, I'd love to hear from you. And specifically, now that we're going on some 6 years since the release of the last theatrical Star Wars film, The Rise of Skywalker, Episode 9, TalkShowNerd at gmail.com, or if you're enjoying this up on YouTube, leave a comment there as well. I would love to hear your thoughts now that we've had, again, going on 6 years since the release of this movie that we'll be talking about and will be the major focus of this week's episode. I want to talk a little bit about Ahsoka as well and where that story is going. But I want to talk about Episode 9 this week for a couple of different reasons. I found two different articles. One from Gaming Bible that does the what could have been. Star Wars fans like to do this. I do this. And I'll do a little bit of that attached to this article, even though I don't agree with it. I wanted to share it with you anyhow. Star Wars Alternative Episode 9 praised by fans. And also an interesting article from Screen Rant. They're talking about the upcoming New Jedi Order post The Rise of Skywalker Rey-centered film that is supposedly supposed to take place some 15 years after The Rise of Skywalker. There was talk, and I mentioned this last week, that film had been postponed. Some of those rumors have been tossed aside by some well-known insiders in Hollywood. Jeff Snyder, to be more specific, said the film's not on hold. We do know that it's not coming out for a while, and we don't have a production start date yet. We have The Mandalorian and Grogu coming out next year. Star Wars Starfighter goes into production in September of this year with a release for 2027 scheduled. So I would imagine that 2028 or late 2027 would be the earliest we would end up seeing this post-Episode 9 film that I still do not believe will be directed by Armin Obaid Chinoy. I'm still not convinced that she is going to be the director attached to this film. But the Screen Rant article gets into Rey's Sith name and draws some interesting connections and asks some questions about what this could mean potentially for this new Rey-centered film that I'm probably most excited for if it hadn't been for the fact that it's the one that, while still scheduled, is probably we may have to wait the longest to end up seeing. I've mentioned many times on the podcast that I like to see the timeline move forward, and I want to continue to see these stories relating to the sequel trilogy. I've also haven't hidden the fact that I absolutely love The Rise of Skywalker, Episode 9. Heading into my summer vacation, and there may or may not be an episode next week. I just wanted to give you a bit of a heads up, because I will be on vacation next week. I might do an episode depending on if anything pops up, but I also may just take the week off from all of my talking jobs that I do, whether it's the full-time job that I'm taking a week off of or the podcast. But we'll have to wait to see. But if there is no podcast next week, that's why I'm on vacation. But I decided that, because I always watch I watch films all the time, but I always watch a lot of movies when I go on vacation. And typically I go and keep track of the movies that I watch. And this year I decided for my summer vacation I wanted to theme it. So I decided that I was going to theme my movie watching over the summer and my vacation on watching my favorite films, my favorite all-time films, which is a little difficult because I have a huge Blu-ray collection and I love all the movies that I own, but I figured I would focus on the films that I consider to be the most rewatchable. Now, I may bring into the mix one of the original trilogy films recently, but if I don't, I'm probably going to end up watching The Rise of Skywalker, because The Rise of Skywalker is an infinitely rewatchable film. It takes a lot of criticism, certainly not as much criticism as, say, The Last Jedi, but I also think much of that criticism is attached to how it relates to The Last Jedi and The Force Awakens. And if you remove those two films from the calculus of the movie, I think there's fewer criticisms, at least in my opinion, and it's all subjective. The only critique that I really have of Episode 9 is that they didn't utilize the Knights of Ren the way they could have. And that's listed in this story from Gaming Bible that I'll kick off the show with this week. I liked their inclusion. I liked the fact that JJ did good on introducing those characters from, in The Force Awakens in the form of that flash-forward flashback that Rey has on Takodana, but I just felt that they kind of just showed up to be this ominous presence, and then when we did see them in action against Kylo Ren, they just weren't utilized in the best possible way, even though I very much enjoyed that sequence. So I thought that I would, share these articles with you this week and share with you some of my thoughts on the film, because I thought they were interesting reads nonetheless, even though I kind of disagree with this first one, which goes as follows. So Dan Lipscomb from Gaming Bible writes this: Star Wars Alternative Episode 9 praised by fans. The duel to end them all. Now, he writes, it's pretty clear that if you ask any Star Wars fan, the disappointment with the sequel trilogy is well known, not just because of the disastrous planning on Disney's part, but for the final major letdown of the final part. And again, this goes back to, I've talked at length on the podcast about the planning and what was planned and what wasn't planned and how it compares to the original trilogy. But the letdown part, again, I think speaks to its connection to the rest of the films, not just The Last Jedi and The Force Awakens. And on that point, I mean, this was a Herculean task that was being attempted by J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio in the making of this film. So I thought that they did an admirable job wrapping up all 9 movies, but also did a fantastic job just creating an incredibly fun and rewatchable film. Now, they go on to say, Episode 9, in their opinion, is an absolute mess. Bizarre plot points, characters being wasted, plot lines completely forgotten. But there was another plan for this episode, and Star Wars fans would have preferred that. Before J.J. Abrams jumped on to work on Episode 9, it was originally intended to be a Colin Trevorrow film. His screenplay was eventually leaked to the masses. Now, what's funny about this to me is that it's really easy for fans to go and do this and say, what I would have preferred is this other version that got tossed to the side. Okay, I get it. I do it too. I get it. It still is a little bit annoying. Over on Reddit, one fan puts forth the theory that this would have been a superior option, being the Colin Trevorrow film. In their post, they list the improvements. Knights of Ren are actually doing something. Okay, I gave you that one. Rey remaining the child of nobodies, which I think is the strongest part of Rey's character in The Last Jedi, setting off a stormtrooper uprising. Now, these were all potential plot points. Well, let me back up. Not all potential. These were potential plot points going back to The Last Jedi. Rey being potentially set up as a nobody, we know that. And then there was a deleted scene in which Finn actually goes and addresses the stormtroopers and tries to get them to turn on Captain Phasma. One reply notes this: if you just read the synopsis on Wikipedia, yeah, it sounds way better. Though the quality of the script is still called into question, some fans believe that the direction for certain characters would have made more sense. The whole Stormtrooper uprising plot with Finn and Hux could have easily been the best part of the sequels, though not everyone is convinced that this version would have been a good film. In my honest opinion, it would have been, with the script that leaked, a differently bad film from The Rise of Skywalker, but just as bad and controversial. We may have more interesting visuals, but that's it. Ultimately, we got what we got, the article writer says. And it was a spoiled moment for the franchise. We can only dream of what could have been. As this user puts it, the script has issues, and I think it could have turned out better or worse than The Rise of Skywalker, but it would have been a better trilogy overall. Now, again, I've read that script, I've watched some of the different commentaries relating to it. Somebody actually went so far as to create animation, 3D animation, tied to what that script would have been to give us a bit of an idea of what it would have looked like. And it's hard to tell. Colin Trevorrow is hit or miss for me. I've been going through and watching the Jurassic World movies, and the first Jurassic World I quite enjoy, and as a matter of fact, I'm one of the few individuals, apparently, that really enjoys Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. Jurassic World Dominion is where they kind of lost me. You know, if you want to just wipe out and then make sure you have your phone in your hand to ignore the parts of the film where the locusts go and show up, then Jurassic World Dominion, you know, will work for you. It's got some great sequences, but it suffers from that sequel bloat where they just try to pack way too much into it and it kind of just bloats the film. And this is something that I don't feel The Rise of Skywalker has. Nor do I agree that there are plot points that are dropped. As I said, the only part of the film that I really have any criticism of is just how the Knights of Ren were handled. But even then, it doesn't really ruin the movie for me. It's just those moments when they show up on Pisana or they show up on Kijimi before we get to see them square off against Kylo Ren as he force grabs the saber. Those moments where they're supposed to be threatening and it's supposed to give off this air of foreboding, it just doesn't end up paying off in the end. Otherwise, I feel like, me personally, it is an incredibly fast-moving film that, from the jump, doesn't let up. The 2.5 hours that the film clocks moves by at an incredibly quick pace. I love the fact that all of our characters are together on this adventure. You know, a payoff of that which we didn't get in The Last Jedi with all the characters split up. And with that, as a complement to The Last Jedi, it really is a much different film in terms of tone and in storyline and pacing. I've made this comparison many times. Like, The Last Jedi is kind of your really, really good steak. You got to just kind of take it and enjoy it. You know, you got to slow cook the steak and you eat it. You just kind of savor every bite. Wherein, when it comes to The Rise of Skywalker, this is more of your pizza, popcorn, snack fare, where you're just along for a raucous Star Wars ride. And I believe both of them work, but The Last Jedi works more in kind of the same way that Andor works, in that slower burn with exciting moments that take place. The battle sequences in The Last Jedi are fantastic. I love the opening sequence that takes place above Dakar. I love the Kylo Ren, Rey, and Praetorian Guard fight. And I think the end battle on Crate is absolutely stellar. I love that film. And when you do go and compare it to, in the action sequences that we get in other films, it kind of makes up for the fact that they a bit, and this is, I've had this criticism before. I guess I do have one other criticism of The Rise of Skywalker. The end sequence, the space battle sequence over Exegol, I just felt it was a little too kinetic. We needed some more. I would have appreciated more shots to have lingered on the characters a little bit longer in that battle. I felt like some of the editing choices that were made regarding the spaceship battles specifically were a little bit too quick cut. Once the rest of the galaxy shows up in their ships, they slow the action down a bit and you get some longer sequences and some really amazing establishing shots. But when the rebellion arrives on Exegol, I remember the first time I saw the film, I was really kind of let down because I was expecting this epic space battle on par with what we got, say, with Return of the Jedi or the Death Star battle, which is my favorite space battle of all the films. But when you look at the totality of all of the movies and what came before it, I'm absolutely able to forgive it and enjoy that final sequence in all of its different parts for what it is. Because the sequence with Rey and the Emperor, which we'll talk about here in just a moment, as that's kind of the focus of the other article, I love every single moment of that, and I have no issue at all with all the Jedi moment or any of that. And when you consider the space battle sequences from the prequel trilogy, along with the ones that I mentioned from the original trilogy, then if I ever need to go and get my space battle fix, there's plenty of other films, and it does actually go and offer up something a little bit different. Either way, with all of these things that I'm mentioning, I find this film absolutely rewatchable, and on its own, a really interesting Star Wars story. The special effects and the sequences are stellar. We go to multiple locations. We go on multiple different adventures, none of which are boring. The chase sequence with the speeders on Pisana is absolutely fantastic. When we end up at the second Death Star wreckage and Rey goes scavenging and takes off on that skiff over the waves, that entire sequence leading up to that incredible and what is, in my opinion, one of the greatest lightsaber battles of the entire series between Rey and Kylo Ren with the water crashing on the Death Star wreckage. I mean, I understand what they were going for, and it's kind of disappointing to me that the fans are so dismissive of the film with so many fantastic, iconic moments in the movie that they were obviously aiming for, and I think there was a lot of fan fatigue and an expectation for the film that simply was never going to be able to live up to the hype. So let's get into the Screen Rant article, which I thought was rather interesting. And it talks about Rey's Sith name, and they say it shows the real challenge for Star Wars' new Jedi Order film. I think that it actually opens up amazing opportunities, and who knows if they're actually going to go and take advantage of these opportunities, but I certainly hope that they do. But the article goes as follows. 6 years after the release of Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, the franchise has made future Rey Skywalker a challenge, and it's even bigger thanks to her Sith name. So in the final chapter of the Skywalker saga, Rey was revealed to be the secret granddaughter of Sheev Palpatine, the resurrected Galactic Empire seeking to reclaim the galaxy once more with his final order. While Rey eventually resisted his influence and rose with the power of multiple generations of Jedi flowing through her, there were initial fears that she was destined to inherit Palpatine's dark legacy as a Sith Lord. At the end of The Rise of Skywalker, Rey takes the opportunity to claim the last name Skywalker as her own, with the approval of Leia and Luke Skywalker's Force ghosts, rejecting the Palpatine last name regardless of her blood ties. However, this has always been a controversial moment among the Star Wars fandom, for various reasons, good and bad. That said, Marvel Comics' new The Rise of Skywalker adaptation has compounded the issue further, complicating a challenge in Rey's upcoming new Jedi Order movie that will need to be addressed concerning her overall identity. So, Star Wars has confirmed that Rey would have been Empress Palpatine. Now, of course, this was mentioned in the film itself. So it was a subtle confirmation that they write in Episode 9's newest comic adaptation, wherein it shows the sequence in the comic. So it starts off with Rey saying, "But we can't make it through this night alone." I think that's what she is saying. And then you hear Palpatine saying, "Long have I waited for my grandchild to come home. I never wanted you dead. I wanted you here, Empress Palpatine. You will take the throne. It is your birthright to rule here. It is in your blood, our blood." Now, this was all lifted directly from the film. "I haven't come to lead the Sith," says Rey. "I've come to end them. As a Jedi," and she says yes. And then he goes on to say, "No, your hatred, your anger, you want to kill me. That is what I want. Kill me. My spirit will pass into you as all the Sith live in me. You will be Empress. We will be one." And then Rey concludes saying, "All you want from me is to hate, but I won't, not even you." Now, in the article, they say, in the actual Rise of Skywalker movie, Rey receives a vision of herself as a Sith Lord while searching for the Wayfinder in the ruins of the second Death Star. Wielding a double-bladed lightsaber with a hinge function and sharpened teeth, promotional elements and Star Wars media have referred to this character as simply Dark Rey. This opposed to any kind of actual name unique to her as a potential dark side wielder, like one beginning with the name Darth. Star Wars and the upcoming new Jedi Order will break the decades-long tradition and finally move past the might of the Empire. What will take its place? Now, additionally, Rey facing Palpatine on Exegol isn't much better, they write. While Palpatine did share his desire for Rey to take his place as the new Empress in the movie itself, Marvel's new Rise of Skywalker adaptation features a subtle yet significant new piece of dialogue. Were she resurrected as a Sith Lord specifically, referring to Rey as Empress Palpatine? Keeping that in mind, one can argue that this isn't much of a Sith name at all, while also being just as problematic as the Rey Skywalker. Now, let me start here. I actually think the article writer made a mistake, because that line is in the movie. That is directly from that. "I never wanted you dead. I wanted you here with me, Empress Palpatine," and he points to the throne. So I almost am starting to believe that the writer of the article didn't watch the movie all that often and didn't realize this was actually in the film. It doesn't negate the point that they're trying to make in the Sith name. However, his saying that this was specifically coming from the Rise of Skywalker adaptation is false. Now, the article goes on to say, in another timeline and cut of the Rise of Skywalker, Palpatine might have christened Rey with an actual Sith name, mirroring how he gave Anakin Skywalker a Darth name in Revenge of the Sith. Likewise, even Emperor Palpatine himself had Darth Sidious as his true name. Instead, it seems all Rey would have been given is the Empress Palpatine line. Now, they go on to say that this underwhelming new detail, which is not a new detail at all, gets worse in their mind when thinking about Rey and her Skywalker name. Rey, defining herself by an existing legacy, had already been a point of controversy, especially after Rian Johnson's The Last Jedi, which they say had set up the perfect means for Rey to be her own entity. And again, this is all subjective. There's certainly an argument to be made, they wrap up, that Lucasfilm's best course of action might be to avoid exacerbating the Rey Skywalker issue altogether, instead focusing perhaps on maybe just Rey exploring her new, unique position in the legacy of the Jedi. Now listen, I don't think they should, and this is really what I wanted to drive at here, and that is, I think this offers a unique opportunity and some depth for this new Jedi Order film were they to decide to go and take advantage of it. And that is, as Rey is training this new Jedi Order, you could have a point of conflict wherein the details of her past, her relationship, being a Palpatine, how she came about, being the daughter of a failed, for lack of a better way to describe it, but a clone of Palpatine, and the fear that people might have that she may break free from the good side and turn to the dark side. Even going so deep as to perhaps exploring, Rey's own difficulty with that lineage as time goes on. Perhaps feeling that sense of dark side in her. And it would be an interesting parallel going back to what we saw with the flashback confrontations between Kylo Ren and Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi. So wherein this article and Screen Rant, and it kind of goes along with the hate that The Rise of Skywalker ends up getting, focuses more on the negativity and the problems that this could bring, I'm more convinced that this is the opportunity that could lend itself to some really good storytelling. And while this would not be an extension of the Skywalker story, you could still keep those connections by exploring what it must be like for Rey, knowing that her bloodline does actually trace back to Palpatine as she goes to train the next generation of Jedi, where in and of itself this lesson could be uniquely taught by her. Having that bloodline attached to ultimately, like the ultimate of dark side force users, while she tries to go and train a new generation in the light side. Now, you circle all the way back around and to what Obi-Wan Kenobi said, and it really just depends on your point of view. And unfortunately, I think for a lot of individuals, they just get stuck on how they didn't like this movie because it didn't live up to their expectations. And I think that it largely didn't live up to expectations, and that comes from individuals that hated The Last Jedi and were hoping that The Rise of Skywalker would redeem itself, but had such a bad taste in their mouth from The Last Jedi, they simply couldn't allow it to go and succeed. They couldn't see beyond it because of their frustration from the previous movie. But again, it still remains one of my favorite Star Wars films, just because of how immensely entertaining it is. And if you're going to get a Star Wars fix, there's almost no better film that gives you just a little bit of everything that you want in a Star Wars movie, at least for me. Between the space battles, and I'm not talking about the end battle, but the opening sequence, where they've got the Millennium Falcon on that, that spaceberg, and they go to retrieve the information from Bulio. It's a fantastic, space action sequence. I love it with, the fighting with the First Order TIE fighters. And then right on through the speeder sequence on Pisana, the lightsaber battles, of which there are numerous ones. One of my favorite moments in the film, and then we'll wrap up the show this week. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on where you are now with The Rise of Skywalker. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com, or again, leave a comment up on YouTube. But one of my favorite moments in the movie is so subtle, I've never heard anybody mention it. But when they're on the wreckage of the Death Star 2, and Rey, after she comes out from the dark side closet in the throne room, having seen the dark side vision of herself, a moment, again, that I absolutely love. And she comes out and falls down, and she drops the Wayfinder, and it rolls across the ground, and Kylo Ren is there, and he picks it up. When Rey ignites her lightsaber in that moment, Kylo Ren does this subtle, exasperated move where he just goes, ugh. And his hand falls to his side holding the Wayfinder, as if to say, gosh darn it, she's still ticked off. I'm going to have to fight her again. It's a great little subtle moment that I'm not even sure that was the intent, but that's always the read that I have on Kylo Ren. The moment that she ignites her lightsaber and she just looks ticked off as all get out. And Kylo Ren just sort of drops his hand in the Wayfinder, just is like, really? We're still going to go through this again? It's just a fantastic moment. I am certainly looking forward to a rewatch of The Rise of Skywalker. I love that film, and I want to hear from you. Again, leave a comment up on YouTube, talkshownerd@gmail.com. Hope you enjoyed this week's episode. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I hope wherever you are happy, you're healthy. I hope you're safe. God bless. And I will talk to you maybe next week, but certainly on the next episode. And I look forward to hearing your listener feedback. Thanks. Bye.
The Force will be with you. Always.
My Nerd World.